That's my sister at the door. Keep her away from the sponsor tables. She'll look out of place up there. I heard it through the event coordinator's earpiece. She was standing 2 feet from me in the lobby of the Foundry Room, a converted warehouse in Charlotte's South End that my brother had rented for the night for what his website called a founder's gala. The coordinator's face went red. She didn't know I'd caught it. She looked down at her clipboard and told me, very carefully, that the pre-registered guest list had a seating conflict and that I was welcome to wait in the bar area near the entrance. I told her that was fine. Then I walked back through the glass doors, into the November air, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment watching the valets in their black vests taking keys from people I didn't recognize. My dress, the navy one I bought on sale 3 years ago for Hugh's company Christmas party, felt suddenly like the wrong costume for a show I hadn't auditioned for. I had driven 4 hours on I-77 to be here. I had skipped a Saturday shift to be here. I had Hugh's old leather journal on the passenger seat of my Honda because I thought, in some hopeful corner of my brain, that this would be the kind of night worth carrying a piece of him into. I got in the car. I stopped at the Sheets on the highway 20 minutes north of Charlotte, filled up my tank, and sat in the parking lot with my phone on the steering wheel. I opened the Wells Fargo app, navigated to recurring transfers, and canceled the $1,800 automatic wire I had been sending to my brother's business account every single month for 36 consecutive months. The confirmation screen said, "Transfer series successfully canceled." I sat there a little longer, then I drove home. Before I tell you what happened after that, I need to take you back to where this started. Because if you only hear the gala part, it sounds like a bad night. It was so much more than a bad night. Our father left when I was 15, and my brother Adrian was 7. He didn't leave dramatically. He just stopped coming home, and then the utilities started getting shut off, and then it was clear he wasn't coming back. My mother, Eleanor, worked the front desk at a pediatric clinic in Columbus. Good woman, exhausted woman, the kind of person who holds everything together so quietly that nobody notices the effort until she stops. I noticed. I got a job at 16 bagging groceries. 17, I was waitressing Friday and Saturday nights. I put myself through Columbus State on a combination of Pell Grants, loans, and whatever I could scrounge, then transferred to Ohio State for my nursing degree on a scholarship. By the time Adrian graduated high school, I was pulling night shifts in the ICU at Ohio Health and sending our mother money every month so he could focus on his business degree without working 40 hours a week to pay rent. I didn't resent it. I want to be clear about that. Adrian is 8 years younger than me. I watched him do his homework at our kitchen table while I ironed my scrubs for the morning shift, and there was nothing in me that wanted his life to be harder than it had to be. I chose to help. I kept choosing it. I met Hugh when I was 32. He taught shop class at a high school in Worthington and spent his weekends building furniture in our garage. Real furniture, the kind with dovetail joints and careful measurements, the kind built to outlast the person who made it. He kept a leather journal for his plans and recipes, and the occasional note that had nothing to do with either. He had a way of writing things down that made them feel permanent. Hugh died 14 months before the gala night, pancreatic cancer, 9 months from diagnosis to the end. He was 51 years old. I'm telling you about Hugh because he is the reason I still had anything left to give after everything that followed, and because he warned me. He warned me about 3 months before the diagnosis, sitting in our kitchen after I had gotten off the phone with Adrian for the second time that week. Adrian's commercial real estate development firm was struggling. He had launched it in Charlotte 3 years prior, a mid-size market development outfit targeting mixed-use projects in up-and-coming neighborhoods. The timing was bad. Rising interest rates killed 2 of his anchor deals. His biggest commercial tenant backed out of a signed letter of intent. He had payroll to cover and lenders calling. He called me crying. I told him I would handle it. Hugh set his coffee cup down and looked at me from across the table and said very quietly, "You can throw him a rope, Margot, but don't become the rope." I didn't listen. I set up an $1,500 recurring wire transfer from my Wells Fargo checking account into the business account he gave me. First of every month, like clockwork. He told me it was a temporary bridge, 6 months, maybe 8. He said he had 2 silent investors lined up and a bank loan in process. He said he'd pay me back with interest. That was 36 months before the gala. I want you to understand what 36 months of $1,400 looks like from the inside of a nursing salary with a mortgage and no cosigner. It looks like a 2012 Honda Civic with brake pads I kept meaning to replace. It looks like a dental crown I needed since 2022 that I kept postponing because it costs $400 and my insurance only covers part of it. It looks like generic cereal and off-brand dish soap and not replacing the winter coat that finally gave up the lining last January. Meanwhile, Adrian and his wife Simone moved into a $640,000 house in Ballantine. Simone drove a leased Audi Q5. They had a boat they kept at Lake Norman. Adrian sent me photos sometimes. The view from his office suite downtown, a rooftop dinner, a weekend in the mountains. I liked the pictures. I kept sending the wire. 2 months before the gala, Adrian called to tell me about the Founders' Night. He had landed a significant mixed-use contract in the South End. Apartments above ground floor retail, the kind of thing that gets written up in the Charlotte Business Journal. He was throwing a gala for investors, city council members, and press. He was calling it a milestone moment for the firm. An invitation arrived in my email 3 days later. No seat assignment, no meal preference form, no RSVP link. Just hope you can make it. Adrian in the subject line and a JPEG of the event flyer. I called him. He said it was going to be a packed night, lots of moving parts, but to just show up and he'd take care of it. I took that Saturday off. I drove 4 hours. I wore the navy dress. I brought Hugh's journal because I thought it was the kind of night worth bringing him to. And I stood in the lobby of the foundry room and heard my brother's voice through a stranger's earpiece, telling someone to keep me away from the tables. He texted me at 8:47 while I was already back on the highway heading north. "Hey, I heard there was a mix-up at the door. I'm swamped in here. Maybe head home and we'll celebrate properly soon?" I read it at the sheet stop. I stared at it for a while. Then I canceled the wire and drove home. If you've ever been the person in your family that everyone calls when something breaks, the one whose number gets dialed at 11 p.m. before it goes to anyone else, but somehow ends up last on the list when the good things happen, hit that like button right now. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. You'd be surprised how many of us are out here. 3 weeks after the gala, Adrian texted me on a Tuesday morning. I was between patients, standing in the break room at the hospital in my scrubs, and my phone buzzed on the table. "Hey, did something happen with the wire? Banks showing a missed payment. First time in forever lol. Everything okay on your end?" No mention of the gala, no acknowledgement of the drive, the parking lot, the navy dress, just a practical inquiry about a transfer. I set my phone face down on the break room table. I picked up my coffee. I thought about Hugh's voice, patient and unhurried, telling me not to become the rope. I picked the phone back up and typed, "Ask whoever your actual investors are." Then I put it in my scrubs pocket and went back to work. He called 4 times in the next 2 hours. I let them go to voicemail. He texted 3 more times after that, each one shorter and more alarmed than the last. I didn't respond to any of them. I came home that evening, made soup from scratch, folded my laundry, and went to bed at 9 o'clock and slept better than I had in months. 10 days later, on a Sunday morning, someone knocked on my door. It was Simone. She was wearing a fleece pullover and jeans, no makeup, and she looked like she hadn't slept. She had driven from Charlotte that morning. She said she needed to show me something and asked if she could come in. I made coffee. We sat at my kitchen table. She pulled out her phone and opened their joint business account on the banking app. She turned the screen toward me and pointed to a line item that appeared every month going back 3 years. $1,800 incoming wire, sender listed as Margaret C. Percentile transfer. She said she had always assumed it was a vendor payment, a contractor or a consultant with a common last name. It wasn't coded the way a payroll or a loan disbursement would be. She never thought to look more closely, until it stopped showing up. She had looked it up 2 days ago. It traced back to a personal checking account. She had called her bank contact to confirm the account holder's full name. "He told me he had a small business loan from First Citizens and 2 silent partners," she said. Her voice was very level. "He never mentioned you." I didn't answer right away. I got up and went to my bedroom closet and pulled out a shoebox I had labeled in black Sharpie on the top. "A's stuff. Keep." I brought it back to the table and set it between us. Inside were 36 printed wire confirmations, each one stapled to a sticky note in my handwriting. March 2022, skipped brake job. August 2022, no dental crown. October 2022, kept the cracked windshield another month. December 2022, no Christmas budget this year. And on, 36 months of small accounting, every sacrifice logged in blue ink because I had learned from Hugh that things worth doing were worth remembering. Simone picked up the first one and read it, then the next. She went through all of them, slowly, in order, without saying a word. When she got to the last one, November of this year, the month the wire stopped, she put it face down on the table and pressed her fingertips against it for a moment. Then I showed her my phone. I pulled up the text thread from the gala night, the head home text. Below it, in a note I had typed in the Sheets parking lot because I knew I would need it later, were the exact words I'd heard through the coordinator's earpiece. "That's my sister at the door. Keep her away from the sponsor tables. She'll look out of place up there." Simone read the note twice. Then she set my phone on the table and put both her hands flat on the surface and looked out my kitchen window for a long time. She didn't collapse. She didn't cry dramatically. She just sat there with her jaw set and her eyes very bright, like someone doing very hard arithmetic in their head. Then she picked up her own phone and called Adrian on speakerphone. He answered on the second ring, cheerful, asking how her drive up to see a friend had gone. She said, "I need you to tell me the names of your two silent investors." A pause. "Why, is something going on?" "The names, Adrian." He gave two names. I had never heard either of them in 3 years of conversations. Simone said, "I'm at Margot's apartment. Come to Columbus." The silence lasted almost 10 full seconds. "Simone. Now, please." He made it in under 3 hours. I don't know how fast he drove. He knocked on my door at 2:15 in the afternoon wearing a fleece he'd clearly grabbed in a hurry, and when I opened the door his eyes went immediately past me to Simone at my kitchen table and then to the shoebox. He came in. He sat down across from his wife. He looked at the shoebox like it was something he wished wasn't there. "Margot," he started there with my name as if that was a full sentence. "The shoebox was my idea," I said. "Hugh's, actually. He used to say if something is worth doing, you should be able to show your work." Simone turned her phone toward him and let him read the Gala note for himself. He didn't try to explain it. He didn't offer a version of events where the words meant something different. He read it and put the phone down and stared at the table. "I was embarrassed," he said finally. "The investors at that gala, these are people who believe I built this from the ground up. If they saw you there and started asking questions—" "What questions?" I said. "What were you afraid they'd figure out?" He didn't answer. "That your sister is a nurse," I said. "That she drives a 12-year-old car. That she sent you $6,800 over 3 years and you told her it was temporary and you never once said thank you out loud. Were those the questions?" He put his face in his hands. Not a performance. Just a man who had run completely out of road. Simone stood up. She picked her keys off the table. She looked at Adrian with an expression I recognized. It was the look I had worn in the parking lot of the Sheets on I-77, the specific look of someone who has just understood something they cannot unknow. "I'm surrendering the Audi on Monday," she said. "I'm calling the leasing company first thing, and then I'm going through every line of our finances and finding out what else we've been living on that we didn't earn." She paused. "I'm sorry, Margot. I didn't know. That's not an excuse. I should have asked more questions, and I didn't." I nodded. She left. Adrian stayed. It was the two of us in my kitchen, the shoebox between us, and for a while neither of us said anything. He looked around the apartment, at the water stain on the ceiling near the window, at the gap where the baseboard was separating from the wall that I kept meaning to fix, at the ancient space heater I ran in the winter because the furnace didn't reach the back of the unit evenly. He had never been here in 3 years. He had never come to Columbus. Hugh's leather journal was on the kitchen counter. I had brought it in from the car the night of the gala and hadn't moved it since. Adrian reached for it slowly, the way you reach for something that belongs to someone else. He turned it over in his hands, opened the cover. Hugh's handwriting covered the inside pages, recipes and wood measurements, and the occasional thought written sideways in the margins. On the inside cover, in my own handwriting, was something I had written the week after the funeral. "Don't stop building things, even when you're tired." Adrian closed it carefully and set it back on the counter. "Hugh said something to me once," I told him. "He said the worst thing you can do to someone who loves you is make their sacrifice invisible. I'm not asking you to pay back every dollar. I know that's not realistic and it's not what I need. What I need is for you to stop making me invisible." He nodded. He kept nodding, slowly, the way people do when they've stopped arguing and started actually hearing. He left an hour later. The apartment felt different after, not empty, just quieter. I made dinner. I watched the evening light change in the kitchen window. I thought about calling my mother and then decided to wait. The rebuild happened slowly, the way honest things usually do. Simone surrendered the Audi. They sold the boat. Adrian moved out of the downtown office suite, $4,200 a month of overhead he'd been carrying on the back of my wire transfers, and relocated the firm to a WeWork co-working space in South End at a fraction of the cost. He hired a proper bookkeeper and opened his financials to Simone for the first time since they married. 6 weeks after the confrontation at my kitchen table, a personal check arrived in my mail from Adrian, $5,400. 3 months of transfers. With it, a note card in his handwriting. "I know this isn't all of it. I'm going to keep going until it is. I'm sorry, Margot, I mean that." I put the check on the kitchen counter next to Hugh's journal, and I left it there for 3 days. I thought about it every time I walked past. Then I deposited it and made 2 appointments, one with my mechanic and one with my dentist. I sat in the dentist chair that Friday afternoon and let them take x-rays of the tooth I had been avoiding for 2 years, and I did not feel guilty about a single penny of the cost. That feeling was so unfamiliar it almost startled me. I sat very still for a moment while the hygienist prepped the impression material, and I thought about Hugh, and I thought that this small, ordinary act of taking care of myself without guilt was what he had been trying to tell me to do all along. My neighbor Carrie, who has lived across the hall from me for 6 years and has seen more of my life than most people, stopped me in the corridor that week. She looked at me for a moment and then said, "Without any setup, you look lighter." I thought about how to answer that. I said, "I think I am." She nodded like she already knew. Thanksgiving, I drove to Charlotte. Adrian and Simone's house was different in ways that were hard to name at first. The driveway held a Ford Escape, not the Audi. The living room had been rearranged, some furniture gone, the room more honest for the absence of it. Simone had cooked everything herself, from scratch, and the kitchen smelled like the real work of it. Roasted turkey and something with apples and cinnamon that had been in the oven for hours. My mother Eleanor was already there when I arrived. She's 68 and she still moves like she's in a hurry to get somewhere, always has. She hugged me in the front hall and held on for a second longer than usual, and I let her. Before we sat down to eat, Adrian stood up. He looked at our mother first, and then at me, and then at Simone, and he said, "Mom, I want you to know that everything I've built this year that's worth keeping, I built it because Margot held me up for the 3 years before it. I didn't thank her the way I should have. I'm thanking her now in front of you because she deserves to hear it with witnesses." My mother reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything. She's lived long enough to know that some moments are bigger than words. We ate. The gravy was too thick and the rolls were slightly overdone, and Adrian burned the first batch of dinner rolls and had to make a second run while we all waited, laughing at him from the dining room. It was loud and imperfect and completely without pretense, and it was the best Thanksgiving I had sat through in years. After dinner, Simone and I did the dishes together. She washed, I dried. At some point she said quietly, "Are you okay? Like, really?" I thought about the question seriously. "I think I'm getting there," I said. She handed me the next dish. "Good," she said. "That's a good answer." I drove back to Columbus that evening with the radio on low and the highway quiet. The way late November nights are in Ohio when the year is winding itself down. The city lights came up in the distance after about an hour, familiar and ordinary and exactly mine. I pulled into my parking space and sat for a minute before going in. Out of habit, I reached over to the passenger seat. Hugh's journal was there. I picked it up and held it in my lap. Hugh had told me once, we were sitting on the back porch, early summer, the year before the diagnosis, that the best thing you could build wasn't a house or a career or a reputation. It was a life where the people you loved actually knew they were loved, where the people who showed up for you could tell, clearly and without having to guess, that you saw them. I sat in the parking lot with his journal in my hands and thought that I was starting to understand what he meant. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't, not completely. Some things you carry for a long time. But I could feel, in the particular quiet of that car in that parking lot on that November night, that I was no longer carrying it alone. I went inside. I put the kettle on. I opened Hugh's journal to the inside cover and read my own handwriting. "Don't stop building things, even when you're tired," and thought that if forgiveness is a thing you build slowly, from honest materials, then maybe I had finally laid the foundation. That was enough for now. That was more than enough. If Margot's story reminded you of someone in your own life, someone who gave quietly and was overlooked loudly, leave a comment below. Tell me whether you would have forgiven or whether you would have kept the door shut. I'll be reading everyone. And if this story meant something to you, please subscribe. There are more of these, real stories, human stories, and I don't want you to miss a single one.